As Martin Heidegger predicted almost 70 years ago, technology is affecting the modern world in some not so pleasant ways. Where do we go from here? Why is the leading cause of disability as of now depression? Why do pharmaceuticals seem to be flooding our society's bloodstream more and more each day? Why is the word trauma brought up so regularly that it doesn't even sound unusual to suffer from it anymore? If, like me, you found yourself asking these questions lately, you might also be wondering, why does the modern world seem so miserable? What I've always found not only disconcerting, but frankly puzzling about the undeniable malaise of our times is that it just doesn't seem to add up. Don't we have everything we need and so much more? Shouldn't we not only be satisfied, but be outright flourishing with privileges like access to a post-secondary education and comfortable housing that our ancestors could have only dreamed of? Shouldn't luxuries like being able to watch our favorite Netflix series while eating our Uber Eats delivered food on a Friday night be enough to put us at ease? I'm reminded of how guilty I would feel as a teenager when my grandfather would stoically talk about what felt like a whole other universe back when he was my age, when he'd spend his days chasing after chickens and getting smacked around by his teachers. If he went through all of that, I'd ask myself, then what in the world do I have to complain about now? And yet, it turns out that those of us from this younger generation really do have a lot to complain about, even though we may not be tasked with chasing chickens anymore, and being hit by a teacher would now be considered a criminal offense. But if that's the case, what actually is it that we have to complain about? What is it exactly that is making the world today so miserable? In the past few years, we've begun to see a real effort in trying to diagnose the underlying disease of modernity, and it looks like all fingers have been pointing to one main source: technology and our misuse of it. As the documentary The Social Dilemma makes very clear, for example, social media has been designed by some very intelligent people behind the scenes to be as addictive as possible, to promote continual use, and therefore profit. On the flip side, as addicts to social media and our smartphones, our days, and minds for that matter, are consumed by bitter comparisons to people who look like they're happier than us on Instagram and Facebook, and toxic feuds taking place on Twitter. And what about kids being lured into this spider's web of self-hatred and gossip, whose brains are still developing? Of course, their mental health doesn't stand a chance. While I do think that this approach is on the right track when it comes to figuring out what is going on, I'm not sure if deleting our social media accounts or setting firm boundaries with our devices would really get at the root cause of the problem we're dealing with here. Specifically, I would argue that the pull of social media is more deeply reflective of the way technology has gradually permeated the way we think about everything, from the world, our relationship to it, and even ourselves long before smartphones and Facebook were even conceivable, something reflective of what Martin Heidegger worried about almost 70 years ago, which is why I'm sure that, unlike me, he wouldn't be surprised at all to find out that today we do, in fact, have a lot to complain about. But first, some background. What does it mean to know something? If you were to ask the majority of philosophers from the Western tradition, they would probably say something like, to know something is to grasp its physical properties, or to know something is to learn true facts about it. Heidegger rebelled against this common definition of knowledge, however, by proposing that we actually only really come to understand something by doing it. Take the example of music. I could spend hours every day learning about true facts about how to play the guitar, read detailed books that tell me exactly where to put my fingers, and watch hours worth of YouTube videos about what each note sounds like. I might be perfectly well versed in all these facts of playing guitar, but of course you wouldn't say that I know how to play the instrument if I haven't actually touched a guitar before. You wouldn't say I know how to play the guitar in the same way a professional musician does, even if she was completely self-taught and barely knew any facts about the instrument beyond just knowing how to play the thing. In fact, when you hear accounts of experts in a number of fields talking about doing what they do best, they'll often describe not thinking at all while it was taking place and entering an all-encompassing zone, far away from conscious effort and rational thought. Take what Carmelo Anthony, one of the greatest NBA scorers of all time, said immediately after scoring a whopping 62 points. For example, it's just a zone that you get into sometimes. Only a certain group of people know what the zone feels like, and tonight was one of those zones. True understanding for Heidegger, then, doesn't involve coming closer to some abstract truth, although this too is certainly one kind of knowledge. but rather is the outcome of being in touch with a specific world. Just as the musician will be well acquainted with the world of music, so too will the chef be entrenched in the world of cooking, and the philosopher will be locked into the world of philosophy. What determines whether or not we are part of a world will be the extent to which we can intuitively follow its rules, work within the limits that are set out by it, and appropriately make use of the necessary tools after persistently practicing the corresponding craft over a long period of time. As a YouTuber, I can't avoid the rules of a video structure. I have to be familiar with my editing as a necessary tool to get this video down, and I have to be instinctively aware of all the minute, indescribable details that make a sentence I say flow well. The significance of settling into our worlds for Heidegger is that they provide our lives with a specific structure and imbue our behaviors with a greater purpose. This is why he thought that being a human isn't so much about living as some detached, rational observer of one's experiences as much as it is about actively participating in them. Heidegger preferred to use the term Dasein, or literally being there, in German over human, but that's a whole other story. Living throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Heidegger was able to see the problems inherent in the increasingly technological world he lived in and envisioned how these problems would multiply as the chokehold of technology continued to get stronger as time went on. This might not sound particularly interesting to you now, since criticizing technology has become so commonplace today. But whereas it is usually assumed that whatever price we've had to pay for technology is at least somewhat compensated for by how efficient and convenient it makes our lives, Heidegger argued that, as a matter of fact, the efficiency and convenience afforded by technology is exactly what makes it so problematic. This is because, as we've seen so far, from a Heideggerian perspective, we find purpose and structure in our life by entering a world, and we only come to know this world by persistently adapting to what it demands of us. But if the promise of technology is to make our lives as easy as possible, how much room do we have to find purpose anymore? What need is there to master, say, cooking when we can buy whatever mass-produced food we want down the street? What need is there to master playing an instrument when we have access to all the music in the world at our fingertips? In other words, what's the point of entering any world when technology makes it so easy for us to avoid doing so completely? One of the dangers of technology, says Heidegger scholar Mark Rathall, with this question in mind, is that it relieves us of the burden of having to develop skills. And once you take the hardship of developing skills out of the picture, where else can meaning really be found? More than just being something that can distract us from finding meaning, Heidegger also saw how the dominance of technology could actually restructure how we perceive meaning altogether. This is because once we become so habituated to seeking out the convenience and efficiency that technology affords to us, instead of the challenges of developing skills, everything that we experience becomes seen as nothing more than empty, dispensable resources whose sole purpose is to make life as efficient and convenient as possible. Nature is no longer something that should be admired and valued in its own right, but is instead seen as mere stuff for agribusiness and other corporations to exploit to make a profit off of. Schooling is no longer about learning for the sake of learning, but becomes a mere means to graduating, so you can get a high-paying job. And even a job is no longer a way of life, or an expression of one's true self, as much as it is a way to be practical, so you can live as luxuriously as possible. In the meantime, in making our lives as easy and productive as possible, our ever-growing dependence on technology has pulled us further and further away from the why underlying everything we do in favor of the tantalizing, but ultimately hollow, promise of progress that comes with being practical. Because what does progress really amount to anyway, when our relationship with technology that provides us with it puts the process of becoming meaningfully absorbed in our respective worlds, which is ultimately necessary for anyone's well-being, at stake? Technology is clearly not going anywhere anytime soon, so if we're going to take Heidegger's warning seriously, more than anything, our best bet is going to be to figure out the healthiest way we can reorient ourselves towards it. To do this, the first order of business, I think, is to give up on the pipe dream that has been instilled in our culture ever since the scientific revolution that technological advancement by itself will make human existence more worthwhile. Instead, alongside this inevitable advancement, to borrow a saying commonly used in mental health circles, we are going to have to put in the work as well. What exactly would this work entail? Well, if the danger of technology is that it takes away the burden of developing skills, as Rathall puts it, by making life suffocatingly convenient and efficient, it seems only right to me that the most sensible thing we can do in the face of this danger is to intentionally seek out the burden of developing skills. That is, to dare to be inefficient and to be crazy enough to do what is inconvenient for nothing other than the sake of accessing those worlds that call out to us, to be in touch with what we love to do most, whether it's basketball, music, cooking, or writing, and to practice it relentlessly so we can have that all-encompassing zone, that pure, nurturing space to find shelter in whenever this technological age of ours threatens to deflate us with its never-ending, meaningless demands to be practical. In dealing with a beast as complex as technology, maybe the answer is as simple as that. As simple as committing to your craft amidst the narcotic pulls of screen time and hyper-productivity. As simple as giving yourself the freedom to get lost in a world that doesn't have to be so miserable after all.